Mic test. Looks like it's working. All right, so took a little bit of time for Twitch to actually recognize that we're streaming, but it looks like we are live. Hooray! Da-da-da-da-da. Doing indie dev streams. Well, that's not how you spell it. Working on fish and plants and all matter of underwater crap. Paste. And then over here, paste. Some fun stuff. All right, so I've been doing some off-screen work while you were gone. I did a couple of things that that I have not bothered to put online just because they were just kind of life things. They weren't really things that you want to spend a lot of time viewing on screen. Some of them were annoyingly techy, and some of them were not actually functional. Show you a not actually functional one. I made it so that I can move these points, but the problem is that I don't know how to tell which handle I've got grabbed, and what ends up happening is when you drag them, it will paste its position onto the next handle. So when you try and grab one of them, you end up dragging like 2 or 3, and they all end up in the same spot. I don't know how to fix that yet. But another thing I did is I was working on undersea stuff. And I was working with the seagrass. And so what I've got here is a new kind of seagrass. So on the left, you can see this thing here is the old kind of seagrass. It's a pretty heavyweight form of seagrass that involves an opaque mesh. And the problem is, of course, that even though each individual one is fairly cheap, when you combine them, they get really, really flabby. In addition, the way that they calculate their shadowing, their self-shadowing, is highly suspect. The new thing I've got is this thing here, which I'm not sure you can really even tell is a thing. There, can you see the difference? It's a fuzzy thing. It doesn't have to be fuzzy, but what I've done is I've made it fuzzy on purpose. And the idea here is that I can now do alpha transparencies using a dither, and that's going to allow me to do kind of fuzzy sorts of things, which is important because we're going to be talking a lot about fuzzy stuff. All of our stuff is fuzzy. We have coral that we need to make and stuff like that, and it's all got to be semi-transparent fuzzy stuff. And anyway, these are super cheap. There are some problems with them, as they are. One of the big problems that we've got is they are flat. That is, when I shine my light on them, you can sort of see how my light just highlights the entire object rather than giving us that sense of depth that we need. In order to get that sense of depth, I'm not 100% sure how we're going to go about it. I could try to do some interior panels that are darker, but I'm not sure how to do that either. I could also change their normal map. So what I've got right now is I've got a normal map that is pointed at the sky. And what that does is every single one of these points is pointed up, or very close to up, rather than along the plane of the plant. Now, the reason I did that is because there's no backface culling, and there's no transmission and stuff like that. So if I wanted to use normals that were not freaking out, it would end up looking weird when I shined a light on the back. But I haven't actually tested that in deferred mode, which is what we're in now. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over here. We're going to grab these things, and we're going to turn off the normal overrides. I actually don't know how to turn them off anymore. I can just turn them off, but I'm not sure whether that will actually turn them off or whether or not it will only appear to turn them off, because I need them to be off in Unity, not in Blender. Well, let's give it a shot. See what sort of performance we're getting out of that now. In theory, the normals are now along the planes of the faces. or, you know, perpendicular to the planes of the face. Yeah, that's what we're seeing. So here you can see what we get if we allow the normals to be as they're supposed to be. You get these ridiculously pitch black elements, and what that is that's the back face of one of these faces. Since I've got back face culling turned on, the back face actually has the same normal as the front face, which means that it's considered to be pointing away from the light, even though it's pointed straight at the light. There's got to be a way to make back face culling use the inverse normal, but I don't happen to know it. Let me just quickly Google that. Back face culling invert normal amplify. Amplify is the name of the library that I'm using. Wow, their form is slow. There we go. Switch face by node. Switch by face node. Apparently there is a way to do it, so let's go ahead and try that first. So if we come down into our underwater shaders, beep, 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 beep. No, that's, I don't know what that is. That's a library. Doop. There we are. Underwater shaders. There we are. So this is what we need. Flora. Here's our seagrass. We go ahead and pull that up. We are going to be able to do a switch by face. Pacom. And here you can see we've got a front and a back. Switch which automatically uses a face variable to select which input to use. So we're just going to use front and back like this. And then we're going to set up a normal. So what we'll do is we'll just put that off somewhere else. So even though it's going to have a weird connection, it's going to be more clear. Normal. And we want the world normal? Is that what we want? I think that's what we want. And then we'll just, no, we want the normal. Normal. Is it the vertex normal that we want? I think that we want the surface normal, don't we? I can't imagine that the vertex normal will give us what we need, but we'll give it a shot. And we'll multiply. And we'll just put these together. And now we're going to be inverting the normal if it's on the back face. The problem is this shouldn't work. It might work, but if it does, I'll be a little annoyed. Do 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 do. Seems to have worked. Okay, interesting. Yep, it worked. So we still have some faces that are dark, but those faces are catty corner to our actual light rather than directly opposing. We no longer have the really, really stark black leaves, but we still do seem to have a little bit of a problem. That doesn't seem to have worked as well as I'd hoped. In fact, I'm not sure it did work. I think I might have just been lucky for a minute. Yeah, it looks like it didn't work. I got ahead of myself. I don't think it worked. And I didn't expect it to work because the vertex normal is not the same thing as the surface normal. There's also a face node. Let me see whether I can get that to work. Switch by face. Face. Well, that's the same exact thing, so we'll use that. Their recommendation is doing multiple passes, one for front faces and one for back faces. How would that be any cheaper? Well, let's take a quick little look here. If we were to tell it to use an additional path, I can give it an extra depth pass. Additional use passes. No, I don't think that's what I need. I don't really know what that is. Unfortunately, it's from 2017, so or surface normal, amplify. World normal node. Okay, so apparently even though world normal has a input, it's not necessary to actually use it. So we can do this in theory. Notice the difference here. This is gold. Unfortunately, this is still red. This is purple. The color of these nodes determines which kinds of renderer passes they work with. Since the red one is a vertex node, it should only work when we are talking about vertex shading. But the dither, I don't know, maybe I'm talking out of my ass. That's what I thought was going on, but clearly I do not know what I'm talking about. So we're going to go ahead and try that one more time. Well, at first glance, it seems better. No, I don't actually know whether it's any better or worse. It doesn't seem like there's any difference at all. It's close to what I want, but I think what I need to do is mix and match. So what we're going to do is sorry. So we got two options. Either we can do duplicates inside of the item itself, or we can try and get this backface method to work. But what I really need to do is mix the normals. Right now, I've turned this off. I could turn it up with a 50% mix factor, but here's the issue. If I were to do that, then when I switch the front face for the back face, all of the back faces will be pointing down. And that's not what I want. So what I actually need to do is set this up so that it overrides with a normal of my choice. And I think that either 1Y or 1Z would be good. That's what we were doing before. We were doing it inherently. And what we really want to do is do it here instead, maybe. So we're going to lerp between this normal and a normal that is pointing upwards. I think Y is up. It's hard for me to remember. We'll know in a little bit here. So now what we're doing is we are switching by face, but we are also then pointing to the sky. Maybe we're not pointing to the sky. We'll know soon enough. It's either Y or Z. So that should soften the amount of darkness in the... I don't see any difference. I see a little bit of difference, but I think maybe Y of 1 is not pointing up because those are pretty stark and pretty black. So my guess is that a Y of 1 is not correct. So we'll just switch that out, and instead of a Y of 1, we'll go with a Z of 1. Just do that on the other screen. That doesn't appear any better. Is 1 down? Oh no, I thought 1 was up. You know what we can do? We can make this a property and then play around with it. Let me rearrange my windows. Peter came by. He says, hello, nice progress. Yep, I'm making progress, steady progress. We're working on plants at the moment. Trying to get the plants to look right, which is hard to do when you're faking all of your shader tricks. So here you can see that I've got some dark panels. You can see how they kind of weave in and out because the back face is... I don't think the back face thing is working. I think the back face thing is entirely not working. But here we got the normal mix, and we can change this normal mix. As you can see, we can make it do whatever we want it to make it do. But you can see that Z is very clearly the wrong axis. Because it's affecting half of them and not the other half, which means it's based around my personal light. This is definitely correct, but for some reason some of them are inverted. Do you see that guy down there? I'm not sure why he's inverted. The normal mix here, yeah, so that's definitely right and left. And this is definitely up and down. But we got some problems with our faces, I think. And this is up. So even though I was complaining that it didn't seem to be correct, Peter says maybe it's in object space. Well, the problem is it's actually called world normal. That's the name of the node. See, and if I'm taking the world normal, I absolutely want to combine it with the world coordinate. And I don't really know whether or not this entry, this normal, is in world or local. I think it's in world because it has to be used with calculating out the lights. But the normal might be a normal map, as in it might be an offset rather than an override. We've also got the local vertex normal down here. This is normally used with compute shaders, though. So I think what it's doing is it's adding my normal to the normals rather than overriding, which is not what I want. The closest I think I can get with this is I might have to use a custom lighting path. Let's try one more time here. Override, normals, amplify. That's not any help at all. That basically ensures that it's a normal map. I don't think I can override the normal. I think that I have to live with the normal. Mifaz says he thinks it's local. Peter says it might need a tangent, at least in shader graph. Try normalizing after the lerp. I think the problem is that I'm adding to whatever the normal actually is, and that's why the reverse faces are not going away when I tell them to. So if we wanted to try normalizing, that's easy enough. But I do not believe that's going to make any difference at all. Because I was using unnormalized vectors in the first place. I was like dragging out to like 3 and 4. So clearly that would be an illegal normal in the first place. But I think the issue is simply that we are trying to override a normal and it's not letting me. It's only allowing me to offset the normal. So I think this entire thing is a waste of time, and what I've got to do is I've got to bake the face in. So we'll just delete these. Save this. Now with that being back to normal, what we can do is over here in Blender, we can just get our normals set up again. So blink, blink, blink. And we'll bring down the mix factor to 0.5. And we'll do that for the other guy too. Blink, blink, blink. 0.5. And then what we'll do is we'll go in here and we'll duplicate everything, and then we'll flip the faces. And then we'll save, and then we'll go over here. We don't have to save that one, but that's fine. Duplicate everything, flip the faces, and save. So with that done, what we should be able to do is make it so that the cull mode is back face culling. And now that we've got twice as many faces, in theory it'll work. Well, it's definitely way better. I think that maybe the normals are a little bit overboard. 0.5 might be just a little bit too high. And if you're wondering what I'm looking at the fuzzy things down at the bottom here. I'm not looking at the columns or the grass. Let's play around with those numbers. Make it so that instead of 0.5, it's 0.3. Maybe even 0.3 should be okay. And the good thing about doing it this way is if I need to clean it up somehow, I can always simply merge all of the verts, and it will combine all those faces so that I don't have to worry about it, and then I can do it again. So my only issue with this is I still had a brownout. Well, if I'm still streaming, I'm still streaming. Let me turn off the fan anyway. I still get these really, really sharp, obvious faces. You see that? I don't like that. Because that really reveals the problem with the way that these meshes are set up. When I get these negative faces, it ends up showing that it's made out of planes. And that's one reason why having these at 1 was the right option, because that way you never get those obvious planar problems. This is also a hair trick. If you're trying to do curly hair, you just put in a whole bunch of faces that have curly hair alpha texture on them, and then you point their normals straight out from the head. And that way, when the camera is looking at them, they're not lit as if they are pointed at the camera. They're lit as if they're pointed at the sky. And it's a really good way for you to make that work out. But what I'm seeing here is that I'm probably going to need some kind of depth element, some kind of thing that allows these to have dark elements within them, because as they are a little bit too bright. Now if we take a look at the actual seagrass texture here, we're running with this. And basically, this is what the original was. This is the new one with some of the alpha stuff put in for kicks. And I think what I need to do is maybe turn these into a darker, like that, even darker than that. And then I can just brighten up the edges out here. And then if I come down into this, I can do the same trick, right? And all I've done is tried to paint the core a darker color. I'm actually already doing ambient occlusion on the core, but it doesn't appear to be having very much effect. So now you can see that what I've got is a situation where I've manually painted dark regions into this mesh. I think it's actually better. It seems better. It's not what I would pick as the ideal solution, and it still gives me a little bit too much evidence that there's like flat quads involved. You can see how there are some obvious flat quads being pulled around there. But there are actually some ways that we can fix that, or at least reduce that. And the way we're going to do that is by simply adding in a subsurface modifier. A subsurface modifier, put it in as a simple here. This will allow us to do more bends. We could also do this in our shader. We could make our shader do a, I forget what it's called. That thing it does where it changes the subdivisions on the fly based on your camera distance, which is what we'll do if we actually think this looks good. But the idea here is that the waves are actually quite small, and we should be allowed to grab and flex. You can see how they're flexing now. I think we would need to do even more subsurface. Let's go ahead and remove the subsurface modifier from here. And what we'll do is we'll do it in our shader instead. So if we pop up that seagrass shader one more time, here it is. Tessellation, there it is. So what we really want to do is get the camera distance. If we take a look at how far we are from the camera, one of these is how far we are from the camera. Is it the Z buffer? I mean, I know what the camera depth fade is. It outputs 0 to 1. And then what we could, in theory, do is use this with a multiple to create the tessellation factor we need. Normally, this is used to fade things out as they get too close to the camera. I also use it to produce fog that's further away from the camera. I'm going to go ahead and try it. Worst thing that could happen is that the game crashes. So what we're going to do is we're going to multiply this by 3. And that means that, in theory, we should be able to get... I'm actually not sure whether this might be backwards. 0 might be what happens when it gets to the camera. I think it is. I think I've got to invert it before I multiply it. Oh, well, that is certainly interesting. So, not only did it turn pink, it's no longer executing any math. That's interesting. Fascinating. So I'm adding in a 1 minus here. But I don't think that's going to fix it. I think there was something wrong with my idea. I think that the tessellation is not at the right point. It's not the right part of the pass. So when I'm getting the camera depth fade, it's telling me that, yeah, it's telling me that it can't actually execute this. It should be popping up an error in the console. It's not, for reasons I'm not sure about. But basically what it's done here is it's flat out told me that it can't do what I'm trying to do, because I'm trying to use this camera depth fade. Camera depth fade is something that happens at a very specific part of the cycle, and tessellation happens way before it, because camera depth fade is like a per pixel thing, and this is a per vertex thing, I think. So what I really need to do is find another way to get that information. I got the vertex position here, but the problem is that what I need is to get it relative to the screen. I think I just need to use a different one of these. I mean, Z buffer is... I don't know whether we're actually using a Z buffer is the only problem. So what we've got here is 1 minus far divided by near, or far divided by near. I don't know enough about what the hell these are. Just the way that they're written is a little unclear. So the problem here is this has nothing to do... This is just the parameters. It has nothing to do with the actual... we need the actual Z buffer. Doesn't appear to be one. All right. Let's just go ahead and do a search here. Tessellate based on camera range amplify. distance-based tessellation node. I'll be fucked. There it is. Brilliant. So they've already got it all worked out for us. And the reason that this was all screwed up is because it was looking for this V4 and we weren't giving it anything. So we're going to make the min distance and the max distance things we can modify. I'm sorry, I just sipped straight into the mic, and I bet that was really obnoxious. I was celebrating. Max tessellate range. And we'll go ahead and make that a 5 since that's what it is by default. So the factor here is the question, the maximum number of tessellations. So we're going to want to, is it an integer value or is it a float? It's a float. Okay. So max tessellations. And we're going to go ahead and set that to 3. We'll go ahead and just make it really, really impressive. There we are. So that should work in theory. Let's find out. The big hope here is that it isn't purple anymore. Oh, that's helpful. So as we get closer, we should see that these get to be really, really tessellated. And that means that we're no longer going to have... We still have the planes. We still have the flat planes. But the wobble in the current should be enough to make them feel organic. It's not perfect. I'm not actually sure how aggressive it's being right now. Okay, so it's based on the camera range, not based on the range of the player, obviously. So what we actually need to do is set up a minimum range as well. So if we do this, what we're going to want is min tessellate range. That's going to be there. We'll change this to 15. There we are. Save that. Oh yeah, that's definitely better. So the lighting is still a little bit wishy-washy, but now you can see that these things feel properly underwater, right? The only thing I really don't like is that we still have some issues with these still seeming too planar, which makes sense. They are planar. See this one directly under my armpit here is really obvious. See? And that's particularly noticeable because the shadows don't properly offset. That might be because this light doesn't have a shadow caster on it. Let's just take a quick little look and see whether or not this light actually casts any shadows. Spotlight. No shadows. Hard shadows. Let's take a look and see how this feels with hard shadows. This might actually solve all of our problems. Well, I'm not really seeing any hard shadows happening here. I guess I'm seeing some. It's feeling better though. I think that we do have some shadow action happening here. It's just really weird. Yeah, this feels pretty good actually. We're still getting the problem with these planes that we've got here. So I think what we're going to have to do is set up our system a little bit differently because we don't want the edges to be noticeable plane elements like that. It is really distracting. So what we need to do over here we've got our object, right? And these elements on the outside are the ones that are giving us issues. And I think all we need to do to make them feel a little bit better is to simply rotate them down. Because if they're rotated down, oh, that's right, I've got to combine them all here. Boom. Nope, that's not it. Boom. So basically, if we rotate them all down, it's going to be a lot less obvious when they are... Oh, no, this isn't going to be enough, is it? Because if we're like this, we'll be able to see it faced straight at us. I don't think rotating it down is going to help any. I think we need to... Sorry, I'm thinking to myself here as I'm doing it, and I think what we might need to do is simply have another one that is flat. And then as before, duplicate and flip. That should give us everything we need. Let's see whether or not that feels a little bit better. Now I only modified the large one, not the small one. So we're still going to see some issues with the small one, but let's look for the large one. It feels repetitive because I'm using the same texture unstretched over and over and over. Yeah, there's definitely some issues with it. What I might have to do is create a shell, like I'm doing an afro. Basically, I have to do an afro. So let's go ahead and make an afro. So this is what we were doing right here. You see these? And what we actually want to do is create a ball and then use these to break up the ball. So we'll just put that back in the middle here. Oh, you know what? I bet the... So you can see how as we move these, the normal gets disrupted. That's not great. Well, we'll deal with that later. The problem here is that it doesn't let me pick itself. Failed to set value. I want it to be radial from 0. I want it to be radial from the center of the object, but it's not letting me. And that means that in order to make this happen, I've either got to have a secondary object that's parented to these, or I got to put them back into the center every single time I do anything. Let's go ahead and do a parenting object setup. That seems like it would be an easier. So if I were to add in a little sphere like this, and then move it, and then move it, and then parent it. Yeah, and then I can pick that object, right? Yeah. So now that it's radiating out from that object, it should be fine. It looks weird. I'm not sure that that actually worked as I had hoped it would. Anyway, let's go ahead and do the same thing here. That one looks a little bit better. Well, we can modify it as we need to, no biggie. We can also just set them as directionalized. 0.2 rather than point away. I'm not actually sure. I don't see any difference between them. Whatever, we'll continue here. So all we need to do is add in a new, well, first off, let's merge all of the void, all the, it didn't, there we are. That way we have all the faces as individual objects now. When we merge in our UV sphere here, we're going to want a much crappier UV sphere, like this. And basically, this UV sphere will allow us to create a core ball, a core element that that makes up the core piece. But as you can see, the UV sphere is mapped a little bit weird. And in honesty, I think that we're going to have to change how this is working. I don't think that we're going to be able to use a UV sphere as much as I'd like to. I think we're going to have to use one of these planes here, or more accurately, we'll start over with a new plane. And what we'll do is we'll cut the plane somewhere around here. And the reason for that is because it gives us an untrunked bit of stuff. And what we can do is we can create ourselves a little tent specifically for this object. Nope. And then I can just grab both of those, set this to orbiting around the 3D cursor, duplicate them, rotate them 90, like that, and we get ourselves a little bit of a tent sort of thing. That should help us to minimize the amount of pokiness that we are getting. But since the tent is obviously square, we need to be careful not to make it feel square when we're looking at it. You see that edge right there. So the question is whether or not this will feel right in the game. Let's find out. So I've only modified the small one this time, not the big one. You know what? I should probably just disable the one I'm not using. So if we go down into our game view, there we are. If we go down into our grass cannon here, we're no longer using this one. So we'll just, actually I don't think I can just disable it. I think what I need to do is, oh, I can just disable it. It will look dumb, but it'll be fine. And you can see how many particles we lost from disabling that grass cannon there. But these should all be the small ones, and you can see how dense they appear to be. Now keep in mind, I did not put in, did I double up all the faces? I might have doubled up all the faces. Let me check. No. So this is it without any face doubling. And as you can see, it's not so shabby. There is a little bit of squareness that I don't like, but it's really helped by the tessellation. The automatic tessellation really breaks up the aggression, the aggressive squareness. So if we wanted to create a... Oh, you know what? I forgot to paint them. So what we've got here is a situation where our tent hasn't been painted. So we're going to go ahead and hide these guys. Boom. Here's just our tent. And if we go over into paint mode, vertex paint, you can see how the guys up here are red and black. But down here at the bottom, I'd hope that I would be able to hide those elements, and I'm sure I can. I can't remember how, though. Unfortunately for me, the painting doesn't seem to want to take. What the hell? I had this problem last time too, where the painting would just suddenly not work. And it's like, what the hell? Why won't you work? Okay, so it'll paint some things, not others. Maybe I just can't see the verts clearly. The problem is the verts are not where the transparency is. How do I get it to render in vert mode? Well, I mean, I can do it like this, but then I can't see the colors I'm painting, which isn't terribly helpful. Okay, so I think that's got all of them. I think so. Yeah, that'll anchor them a little bit better so that they won't have quite as much wish when wash. That was a little bit strange to look at them and see that much wobbling. This should only allow the tops to wobble, which should feel a little bit, yeah, that's a little bit better. So if we want to repeat this process for the clusters, we're going to have to recreate the clusters from scratch, because the clusters that we were using weren't really quite set up this way. So we're going to need to rethink exactly how they work, which is no big deal. So this is the cluster we were using, this guy over here. Let's just move this. Yep. This is the cluster, and if we take a look, you can see that it's basically got branches radiating out like this. And what we actually need is the exact opposite. We need branches that are all radiating out flat. So like shells of an object. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to just delete all of these. Boom. And I add in a plane, and there's our core plane. And all we're going to really try and accomplish here is to create shells. That's the wrong axis, my bad. That's the wrong axis too. There. So what we need to do is create these shells that radiate away from a center. I don't know what the fastest way to do that, but I know that it will help if I hide the stuff I'm not working on so I can see what I'm doing. There we are. And we have a lot of space to cover. We've got like from here in. I'm trying to think if there's a good way to do this using either scaling or arrays. Problem is if I use scaling, it'll stretch. So maybe I will just do it manually. And then if I wanted to, we could just try and see how this feels once we do a lot of ridiculous rotations with it. I wonder if there is an operator to do this. The screw operator doesn't actually work like this. The screw operator creates these weird connective tissues, and it doesn't end up looking quite the way I want it to. So this was like a super, super basic setup, and I believe that I need to paint shit. Well, I should have painted it before I got started. You can see that this is painted strange. What the heck's going on here? That's weight paint, that's why. Vertex paint, thank you. You can see that there is no black, and what I need to do is I need to paint all of this downstairs area black. All of these need to have a black base. Unfortunately for me, it doesn't appear to want to paint through into the deep areas. So basically we're screwed. Let's try it again. So we're going to start over with a plane, and then the first thing we're going to do is paint the plane black. There we go. And that should work. And then we're just going to do the exact same shit we did before. I think we're going to start a little further out from the center. I think we're going to need to have a special case for the center. We'll go ahead and try it, play around with it a little bit here. Oh, I see. This sun is what's confusing me. Because the sun is not a directional light. I know it's a light. Let me change the type of light. There it is. We want it to be this kind of light. That's better. Obviously does not need to be strength 1000. That's a little bit much. Now that it's no longer a point light and is a sun, we should have an easier time actually telling what's going on. Here we are. So we have this spindly little setup here, which is not quite what we want, but it's getting close. And I think what we can do is we can just start to do some silly stuff with offsetting in circles. So if I were to grab this ring here and then rotate, and then I could grab this ring here and rotate, we would have a sort of offset circle. And then in the center, we can just grab some of these duplicate them, scale them down on most axes, but not the z-axis. No, that's not going to quite work, is it? We'll have to do it manually. So now the problem with this is that half of these, all of these are facing the same way, meaning it's very repetitious. But let's just take a look and see how it feels. So we'll just turn this back on. I've made this a much, much larger object. As you can see, it now feels super dense in here. So we'll go ahead and just shut off the other grass cannon. Kabloom. And this is what it looks like. And these are just fine. I don't get any strong impression of them being, well, I guess I do at certain. You can see how now that we're looking out from the center of an object, we do get that impression. So what we actually need to do is, as we move away from the center, we're going to have to either put in some counter elements, or we're going to have to bend these guys way down. Let's go ahead and bend them down. So what I can do is I can just grab the upper edge. And then I can scale them down towards the central point. The problem is that when I scale them down, it's going to end up making them taller and thinner. But in order to get around that, we can switch from this to individual origins and then just scale them up again. No biggie. And then we'll move them down a little bit. And then basically we want to repeat the process for these guys. And I'm thinking that that'll either really help or make it much, much worse. Mifa says that it looks good. So this is what it looks like with all of this stuff turned on. Let's turn off all the stuff we're not using. There it is. So now you can really get a clear sense that these radial elements are not intended to be used on their own. We're not intending to make these out of just these blobs. The idea is that we scatter in other forms. If it's just these, even when I do reduce the amount of squareness, the amount of flatness, it's still going to end up looking pretty flat. But rather than trying to make a one object that works for all things, what we do is we scatter in the other set as well. So here it is with the smaller objects. And I don't know if you could tell what I was looking at before when I was like, oh, all of these are, oh, you know what, I think it broke when I paused it and turned it off. The particle systems are a little bit fragile. It gets stretched now during animation. Yeah, so the animation is world coordinate animation rather than local animation. I'm not really sure how I want it to feel in terms of whether it gets stretched or not, but here you can see that it's no longer really, really obvious that there are very specific large elements because we've broken up the large elements with a smattering of small elements. And to be honest, this looks pretty good for a cheap effect, at least to me. The animation needs some work. Gonna need to do some stuff, but you can see that we can no longer get that really, really obvious view of the edge on elements. It just doesn't pop out the same way it used to. I can still see them if I really look for them, like right there, but I really have to do a search. Just naturally, they don't pop out nearly as much anymore, and that is great. Some of them are not placed the best. So I think that one of our issues is that we have a couple of these that are at the side of a hill or something, and they're getting swept in a little strange. We're going to want to make it so that we can't get this small. That small is a little too small for us. So we're going to just bring them up to 0.5 instead of 0.75. That'll reduce stretching as well, because they are just fundamentally larger. Yeah, so there's a couple over here. Oh, that's not even the same object. That's the plant. That's the Skyrise plant. If the Skyrise plant looks like crap, that's fine, because I haven't worked on it at all. That is literally a placeholder. Yeah, it's not too shabby, not too shabby. I think we need to make the individual ones a little bit bigger. So this was originally created using the grass fronds, the things that look exactly like grass, and they just have a different scale factor set up. So here you can see, this is what it looks like when there are no small objects to break up the large object. You can see how awful this looks. That's why we have to be a little bit careful when we do this. We have to make sure that these don't look terrible. So if we wanted to fix that, what we can do is we can just grab the one that was giving us trouble and move it. And unfortunately, it's impossible for me to tell which of these is which, but it was one of these guys down here somewhere, so maybe this one. We'll just move it. See how I was saying there is a bug where when you grab them, you end up grabbing like lots of them? I don't know how to fix that yet. Yeah, see how that's doing all sorts of nonsense there. All right, well, until I fix that, it might be easier if we clear it and try again. So we just need to lay in a bunch of greenery. Fire. And this is the light cover rather than the heavy cover, and you can see how much better our light cover is than it was before. What we might end up doing is making this large batch system that we've got heavy cover only. That way we can fire them independently and manually make sure that there are no large cover elements on the edges. So here what we've got is a set of large covers on the edges, and you can see why that looks just the worst. So if we're going to do it like this, what we actually need to do is split this up. So we're going to take one of these grass cannons out. We'll just delete this one here. And then down here in this heavy grass cannon, we're going to actually just delete it and use this grass cannon twice. But this one's going to be the heavy one. Yeah, spelled heavy. There we go. Now this grass cannon is going to be using the larger set. So instead of using Seagrass B, it's going to use Seagrass B cluster. Other than that, it's identical, but we want to change the Seagrass heavy draw from grass A into Seagrass B cluster. There we go. That'll give us a real impression of how it looks. And over here, we're going to do the same thing. Seagrass A. There we are. That way we'll be able to tell what we're seeing. Now, if we clear this out, you can see that these are the heavy seagrasses. I believe that they can go up to 0.75, so we might as well draw them at that size. And we want to make sure that that doesn't have any edging that looks like shit. So what we're going to do is we're just going to run around and staple some lighter elements onto the edges so that it doesn't become clear that there are cycles of seagrass around the edges here. There's no way to do this, no easy way to do this using the built-in systems that I've built already, but I may eventually create some kind of automated system, because obviously if I have to do this every time, it's going to be a little bit of a slowpoke. What I could do is I could create a cannon set, an inner cannon and an outer cannon, and have them both fire at the same time. One of them would always be larger than the other, and therefore scatter smaller objects around the ring, around the edge. That would be pretty straightforward. So I've done it, but you can see that I've also pasted some on top of some rocks. That should be okay. The grass does in fact grow fine. Okay, so this is a little bit more of a deliberate smattering. I'm not 100% sure I like how it looks, but it's not too shabby. So there's a little bit of damage here, for example. Someone is standing directly outside my front door and shouting. Not at me, they're shouting into their phone. Yeah, so let's go ahead and try the nested grass cannons. So if we were to duplicate this grass cannon and put it inside the grass cannon heavy, take this grass cannon and clear it. This grass cannon heavy, we're going to want to replace this as a heavy particles. And then this will be light particles. This is not actually necessary because of the way we can set this up, but just for testing purposes, we'll leave it like this. What we're going to do is we're going to open this up, and whenever we do anything, we're going to want to do it to all of our sub-objects as well. So for each particle editor, child in get children, get components in children, particle editor, child.fire. Easy as pie, right? And the exact same thing is going to happen up here with clear. And that's all we need to do to make sure that it works. Why is this? Oh, I got, in case you've noticed, I switched to Writer. Yeah, Mifaz noticed right away. Haven't actually bought it yet. I'm going to go ahead and wait for a little bit longer. Writer is really nice. It seems to be a little bit better than Visual Studio and way better than Monodevelop or Visual Studio Code. I haven't had any problems with it yet, whereas Visual Studio Code literally does not reopen... Visual Studio literally does not reopen the... Visual Studio Code will not reopen the files anymore. After I finish a session with Visual Studio Code, in order to reopen any file, I have to clone the entire directory. So I uninstalled it. Oh, shit. So what I've just done is I've created an infinite loop. Let's go ahead and just give you Phoenix Wright for a second here while I fix this, because I forgot that children includes yourself. I am my own grandpa. I'm my own grandpa. It sounds funny, I know, but it really is so. I'm my own grandpa. Can you tell what I grew up near? I'll give you a hint. It was a desert. So, got to make sure we don't actually fire ourselves when we fire those children. I'll just do some off-screen editing. If child equals this, then continue. Oh, Unity reopened it super fast. I'm used to Unity taking 15 minutes. Maybe it had already loaded all the IDEs or whatever. Problem is that our grass is now completely reset. I guess we should just take this opportunity to do it right. So if we're going to do it with the way I was thinking of, let's go ahead and clone the grass cannon and set the entire thing up correctly. So I believe that we actually lost a lot of data with that changeover, but it was all just random experimental stuff, so I'm not too concerned. Here, we're just going to tell it to clear. Why is it? That was weird. It wasn't letting me see this clear. So what we're going to want to do here is we're going to take the particle cannon and the particle behavior script, and we're going to move them onto the cannon itself. No, we're not. Why can't this be dragged? Copy component. Paste component as new. There we are. So with this in mind, we can now use this particle behavior and this particle system. And that will allow us to have it contained within itself. And then what we can do is we can duplicate this grass cannon, put it inside. This is going to be the grass cannon heavy core. And the grass cannon heavy core is just going to be the same setup, but it's going to be a different mesh. So instead of seagrass B, it's seagrass bleak cluster. There we go. And I believe that the only other change we need to make is to make sure that the inner cannon is a little bit smaller, because having it the same size is the problem. So we're just going to scale it down on all axes. Maybe 0.8 seems nice and clean. Is 0.8 a little too? Yeah, maybe 0.7. Yeah. Let's see. Leave it full height though. So that is going to be our core element. And then, as you can see, when we've selected the outer core, the inner core gets selected as well in terms of visuals. What we probably want to do is make it so that if we are inside of another particle cannon, it gets rendered as a different color or something. Not really sure. Either way, we're going to want to change this. We do not need it to fire 37 of these. But if we fire this, we should get a single setup that is all that we need to do. I do want to change this from grass A, though, over into seagrass. And this over into seagrass B. Save it, so just in case I've still got an infinite loop. Mifa says Arizona. Yeah, I grew up in Arizona. So here you can see what we've got is a smattering that almost works, but not really. And the reason for that is simply that the values are quite low. So let's go ahead and take a look. Well, at first glance, it's not too bad, aside from being really rectangular, but we can deal with that. These are much lighter. They're much less dense than the previous setup I was using, so it's no surprise that they don't look quite as lush. It's kind of the point. I'm trying to see what I can get away with, because the cheaper I can make these, the more of them I can put in. So we've got a little bit of a problem right there. But by and large, these are pretty good. And the thing I like about this is that I can tell where the problems will be immediately, because I'm displaying them right here, and I can just immediately see that there is some light area, and that light area is a problem. So if I were going to do some more spamming to try and clean up these problems, for example, I could just fire it here, and then, you know, if I decide that this guy down here is an issue, I can always move him. You can see there's two of these guys. And if I want to, I can drag these folks around until they're in the right spots. Here. You can see how they are snapping to each other. That is a problem I don't know how to solve. I don't know how to get the game to tell me, or the editor to tell me, to stick to just one of these objects. I guess I can do it using like a really aggressive check to see, you know, mouse down event, set it as that specific object, mouse up event, unset it. I mean, I might as well do that, right? There's no reason not to do it, because I can't use it like this. So, did that fix the issue? Well, let's take a look. I mean, this definitely looks loads better than it did earlier. We still have some problems because I underestimated that factor. You know what? Let's go ahead and do the other thing we can do to fix this, and that is to duplicate this entire ring and then swap it. So if we bring it up like this, we can just grab the underside. And swing it in. And then as before, we can, not that far in. And as before, we can just switch this to individual origins and scale them back up. And then we can grab the tops. Ooh, I missed one. There's got to be a better way to model this. And then we can just scale them out. And then we'll probably want to just scale them down a little bit. And then we can move them all down. And the idea is that we want them to scale so that they kind of hide these elements. So maybe a little bit bigger would be good. But really what we want to do is move them away from the 3D cursor because they're a little bit too close. There we are. And then we need to flip them because they are all pointed the wrong way. There we are. Let's see how that looks. Now I'm using a radial shape, which doesn't actually make much sense. They should probably be bean-shaped. But as you can see, that's much better. It's still got some problems. Wait, why is this not... Did this not update? Or is it that I reversed the faces when they shouldn't have been reversed? Well, let's go back into Blender and turn on... Shoop! Where is the materials? Back face culling. Back face culling. Clickety. I think that those are pointed the wrong way. No, now they're pointed the wrong way. I've got back face culling turned on, so clearly these clips. You know what, we'll just duplicate them and then flip them. There, now they're both. But I'll probably replace this with a bean-shaped setup later on because the round shape is a little bit artificial. Now look at this. I still don't see them. Shouldn't they be like right there? That's so weird. It looks like it might just be that one. Maybe that one is like planted into an incline and somehow parts of it are just too low for it to really process correctly. Like they're clipping into the ground and staying there. Well, good enough for now. This is not too shabby. I really get the sensation that this is a living environment. If you've never been diving, this might seem like a weird way for grass to move, but this is not incorrect. It might not be perfect, but it is pretty good in terms of feeling like this is how underwater seagrass actually sways in the breeze. They're specifically built to sway in the breeze. And that's not too shabby. I don't mind it at all. It turned out a lot better than I was expecting. I'm going to take a screenshot. Oh, you know what? Now that they are properly set up, I can turn dithering back on. Or rather, I can turn them back on for dithered objects. I turned off some of the lights because I had to use forward rendering mode. But one of my friends showed me how to do dithering instead of alpha transparency, and I don't have to do that anymore. I'll just wait for the fish to come back so it doesn't feel completely empty. Oh, the fish aren't gonna come back because I forgot to set this up as a optional target set. There we are. Now that it's an optional target set, we're gonna get fish coming in. Here they come to save the day. Whoa! So let's go ahead and post that. And then what we're going to need to do is create a new set of fishes, because we're using a really, really basic fish. It's not really very realistic at all. Seagrass. Oh. Let me just burp straight into the mic. Post here. Oh, I can't post here. I gotta go post over here. Because for some reason you can't paste shit into TweetDeck. The one downside of TweetDeck. Boom. Okay. So, what we need from our fish, let me go ahead and show you. What we've got right now is a set of fish animations that simply flaps the tail. But that's not how fish swim unless they are really, really bolting. I mean, if they are hauling ass, then yes, that's how they swim. But for small fish, most of their small maneuvering is done using just their fins, and they don't actually wiggle like this. So what we need to do is create a shader that animates their fins. Before we can do that, we have to create a fish model that actually has fins. We're using a fish model that we inherited, and it doesn't have any fins. So to show you what I mean here, this is a cube. If we replace this cube with the fish model, this is the inherited fish model we've been using. Let's just drag it up into the light so that you can be embarrassed at it. This is how it looks. Obviously, it's not very complicated. Now, if we add in the proper fish material instead of what we're using now, fishy swimmy, that is obviously a substantially better fishy looking fish just because it's got the proper textures and stuff on it. It looks a little bit strange this close up, but lots of time to fix that. So what we need to do is we need to create a fish that's got the proper fins. The issue with this is that every fish species has, or at least fish clade, fish group, has its own sort of fin setup. So we are going to have to create multiple kinds of fish models. In order to go ahead and test that, we're going to just start with something simple though. So do we have fishes? Is this an ancient file? No. Cool. If it was an ancient file, I would have recreated it because the ancient files are garbage. So this is the fish model we're using right now. And what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to move it off to the side. The question is, do I want to use this base shape or should I start over? I think we're just going to do it cheap, use the same base shape, and then we will have some fun with it, you know? So if we're going to do some fish modeling, we're going to want to have really obvious visible fins. And so we're going to start by just extruding out some really visual fins, some really obvious fins. And these don't have to be realistic right now. because we're not really worried too much about that, but they do have to feel like fins. So that's going to be like a vertical fin, and then let's go ahead and have an anus fin, har har, but that's actually what they're called. I don't know why. And then we're also going to have a fin off the back. Sorry, I'm trying to catch a very specific section of the geo here, and there we are. And we just extrude that straight back and then scale it up on the z-axis. Scale it down on the x-axis, y-axis. There we are. So that's, you know, the sort of fish fin we're looking for there. But we also need to have some fish fin on the side. So for that, we're going to just do the same thing and extrude out sideways like this. But you can see that we've got a problem. It's only on one side of the fish. We'll deal with that later. So, and by later, I mean in a few minutes. So the side fish fin is going to look really awful for a long time. But we'll get around to making it look right. It'll just take some time for us to start to get it to really feel right, because it's the most complicated fin on the fish. Doop. In terms of how it moves. So we've just deleted half the fish. If we come down here into our setup, we can put on a mirror. Well, that should work. X-axis mirror. That's not the x-axis. It must just be rotated. That's fine. And then if we wanted to clean up, we've got to make sure that these fins actually have a top, because the top got itself damaged when we were setting it up. That one's fine. This one's damaged. All right, that's good enough. We don't have to worry about it too much. But what we do need to do is re-extract the fish visual, because right now it is got some smearing going on. It's not going to look good. So to do that, we're going to select everything, and then we're going to project from view bounds. And basically, we're just going to staple every single fish onto the same square fishy setup. I think that this is actually backwards. I can't remember. It doesn't matter. We'll know if it's backwards or not real soon now. So the other thing we need to do is paint the fish. So if we go over into vertex paint mode, we don't actually have any vertex painting going on, which is a surprise to me. I kind of figured that we would have already done this, but apparently not. Am I using... I must just be using locational awareness? Wow, I am. That is really something. We're going to be using paint. So what we're going to do is we're going to paint it black to start with. And I really wish there was a flood fill option for our paint. There might be, but I'm not aware of it. There is in some of our systems, but not in this one. Black means that it doesn't get modified by the algorithm at all. So if it's black, it is not moving. It's never going to move. So the other thing we need to do is paint some red, and red is going to be the primary tail motion. So if we swap this over to RGB and pump up the red, then we're going to want to paint this area red. And you might be wondering why I'm not painting all the way to the back. And the reason for that is that I actually need to do it with two colors. Because if it's red and green, it's going to be a horizontal fish tail. So that means that the very tip of this tail can animate separately from the rest of the tail or in collaboration with the rest of the tail. But what we're going to need to do is make it just green for these guys. Boom. Now, if we want to do this right, we could add in some cuts along the fin. We'll think about that later. And the last thing we need is to use the blue channel, which is going to be for the side fins. These fins are a nightmare to do algorithmic animation on, but we'll go ahead and try it. And that should be a painted up fish. Let's go ahead and name it. We're going to call it fish test. Exciting names. Save that. The Relin says fishies. Yep, these are super basic fishies. So now what we've got here is the wrong mesh. We'll just switch this out for fish test. No, that's material. No wonder I couldn't find it. Fish test. So you can see that now we've got a fish. It doesn't really look great, but it's not animated yet. So Fishy Swimmy is what we're using to do the animation here. And Fishy Swimmy actually requires you to pass in time values. It can't animate on its own, which is why this fish isn't actually animating. If we wanted to see an animated version of this fish, what we could do is we could create the particle effect that we are using for the rest of the fish. Here's the fish flock. If we go down to this fish flock, these are the fishes. Currently, they are not being animated because we're not passing them a time update. We could, but what happens if we replace them with the... Let's not do that, though. Let's duplicate the fish flock and disable the old fish flock for a minute, because I don't want to accidentally screw up the existing fish flock. I've only got one, and it's not a prefab yet. So this is the new one, and we're going to just go down here and replace the renderer material with the new fish test. And you can see that these are fine. They don't look any different. If we hit play, I think that we're going to find that they look different only because their fins exist now, whereas before the fins didn't exist. But what we really want to do is have these fish fly with just their fins, and that's going to require a completely new shader. The old shader we were using is not going to cut it. First things first, let's bring the fish speed way down. Right now the fish speed is 6. We're going to bring that down to 1. That means that the fish will crawl, and we'll be able to see exactly what we're doing. So there is our fish, and you can see how they are wiggling, and that's absolutely wrong. That is 100% what we want them to not do. So rather than what we currently do, which is just pass in a time value, we're actually going to be passing in a lot of different values, and it's going to be a challenge to get them to work right. So basically, we're going to pass in to every single fish what its local time value should be in a looping time system. So think of it like this. We're going to pass in how far left their tail should be or how far right their tail should be, separate from things like how far up and how far down their side fins should be. It's going to require a lot of annoying work. So let's do it. Let's get to it. Here is our fauna section. Here's our swishy fimmy, or fimmy, swishy, swimmy fishy. And what we're going to do is create a new one that's not that. Boom. Grind. Let's name this tricolor fish, because that's what it's going to be. And then we will name it here, tricolor fish. We got fishy, swimmy, A and B. And this one is broken now. We don't even use it. So we'll just go ahead and adopt it. This is the one we're going to use, the new fish swim. Tricolor fish, kaboom. And you can see that it doesn't have anything to it. So if we go over here to the fish and we drop in that tricolor fish material, boom. Let's go ahead and just name it tricolor fish. It's got nothing. It's coal black. So what we're going to need to do is set it up to be a little bit more interesting. First, let's start with, we should probably create some functions for this stuff. I was thinking about whether or not I should, because what I'm doing is actually fairly complicated in several ways, but I guess we'll just fake it for now. So we're just going to have a texture for the albedo. That's all we're going to need for the moment. We'll come back to it later. Well, we might as well put in the normal map as well. No. So we'll mark this one as a normal map. And this one as the albedo. And then that should allow us to set this up as a fish real quick. The fish bump is a little bit too aggressive. I can change the scale here, but I can't really change it. I could make it a float. We'll just go ahead and manually change it for the moment, because that's all placeholder shit. Yeah. So now we're talking about vertex offsets. We're going to be making all of these verts that are colored funny animate in different ways. So let's start with the tail. We'll use a time.delta time setup for now, because that way we'll be able to see it. So here is the editor, and there is a time setup here, time. What we're actually going to want to use is a time setup that is being passed in from outside instead. But we'll get to that later. For now, what we're going to need to do is set up a frequency. And here's the difficulty with me, because frequency is a measure over time and also over space. Like a high frequency wave means that it happens often and that it's quite short. But in this case, we're actually working with another dimension. So I'm not sure which one of those two dimensions should be called frequency. And I always screw myself up with that. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a length and a speed. Now, speed means two things as well. Let's start with length. Anyway, we're going to need to have a length here. And the length of it is going to be how many ripples there are over any given meter of... Maybe I should call it ripples per meter. At least that way I won't misunderstand it. Ripples per meter. So when we take the ripples per meter, we're also going to need to have the meters, right? So we're going to have the vertex position here. That's a world position. Do I want that, or do I want vertex position? I think I want... This is going to be a vertex thing, so vertex position seems like the right choice. So with that set up, we're going to want to simply multiply them. Like so. Except that we don't actually want to use all of them. We only want to use, I think it's Y, it might be Z. So that's going to be that, and then we're also going to add in a time value, which is going to be modified by a speed of animation value, anim speed. This is temporary because there won't be an anim speed in the final version. We'll be passing it in as individual arguments. But for now, it makes more sense to do it like this so we can see it. So what we've just got is a setup where we take the length of the fish, and we also take the amount of time that's passed. And what that means is that we are pushing the length of the fish out along the time. And if we're doing a circular thing, that means that what we're doing is we're sending pulses down the length of the fish. So all we have to do is turn those pulses into a sine wave, like so. Boom. Now that we have a sine wave, we simply have to add that sine wave to the x coordinate. And that's going to be our local vertex offset. And now we should see the whole fish kind of wobble. Let's see. Yeah. So you can see that Y was the wrong axis, so we'll switch that over to Z, no problem. Yeah, so this is what we get. Now, this is stuff that has more arguments we're going to need to put in, so let's go ahead and put in some more here. Anim speed aside, we're going to need to have a... hold on a minute. Let me pull this shit backwards. We're going to need to have an amplitude. Tail amplitude, we'll call it. We're going to add that in as a multiply. Add that in as a multiply. Put that in as a multiply. Save. But we also need to make it so the red channel is being used. So let's get the vertex color. And we are going to change this multiply with the red. Boom. That way it'll be down towards 0 if there's no red, or up towards 1 if there is red. And that should give us just the tail wobble, see? Now if we create the anim speed a little bit faster here, I can immediately see we have a problem because we are animating a part of the fish body without animating the parts above it. So we're going to have to just change that. Over here, we're going to have to use yellow, or rather red and green, which I believe is yellow, right? There we are. We're going to have to use that for some of these elements here. Oh, what happened? Why did it turn? That was weird. There we are. So I'm going to bring the radius down. It's a little bit too small. Make this yellow here. Make this yellow here. And we're going to want to bring that towards red. So let's make the strength lower and then turn this into pure red and make that point a little bit more pure red. That should really fix it up. Let it re-import. There. So now when we see this fish swimming, we shouldn't really see... Why isn't it swimming? What? There we are. I don't know what was happening there. We still have a problem. I guess there's just... The fish is not fluid enough to actually pull this off at the moment. We might as well, just to get things feeling right, we can add in a subdivision surface. We're going to want to add that in before we do anything else. No, wait. What the hell is this armature? There's no armature involved. And we'll just go ahead and save that for now. And you can see this is the problem here, where we have some red that comes all the way forward into this area. Why isn't this painting? Why does it just randomly break? What the hell is up with this setup where it just suddenly will stop working for no reason? Look, look. Okay, that was weird. Okay, so apparently the points aren't quite where I think they are. Well, whatever. All right, so that's a little bit better. It looks like we got a strange little pivot there, but that's fine. So the only problem I have now is that it's not really properly showing me this fish animating. And I think that's because it's just not passing it in very well. There, just take that selection outline out. For some reason, it's not updating the time. But if I drag it up and down, it does. It must only be passing in the time as a new time in certain situations. I'm not sure why that would be. But since we're not using any world coordinates, you can see how we can move the fish around and it'll just animate. So that is the tail animation. It's not perfect. There are a lot of things that are a little bit iffy. For starters, what I really want to do is use a medium black red, like this, instead of a vibrant red. What the hell? So there is clearly something I'm doing which is picking up debris. I'm not sure what it is. That appears to be a little bit too dark. How do I get this to display points? I'm sure there is a way. Don't know. I guess we'll just continue to worry and wonder and struggle and yell. All right, so now we should have a much less pronounced kink. Yeah, there we are. That feels a little bit better. In the long run, we'll probably polish that even more. The very, very tip should be the highest red, and then it should just kind of fade. I don't really feel like doing that at the moment, though. So now we have a red element. That is the fish swimming along, right? What we need to do now is develop the smaller element for the paddling without that motion. And you know what that is? It's literally the exact same thing. So we're just going to duplicate it and add how exciting, right? So the issue here is that we're going to need to keep track of what the hell's going on. And the best way to do that is through the use of note fields. That's normalize. What is it? C? So there it is. These note fields will allow us to keep track of which of these elements is what. And as we get more complicated, tail motion red. We're going to need that a lot. We're going to need that a lot. So the thing about that that's kind of fun is that once you've put stuff inside of a note field, oh, it didn't work. Never mind, I lied. Usually, once you put stuff inside of a note... Huh. Don't really know what just happened there. Anyway, it's supposed to be green. Okay, it's apparently completely busted. We're going to just save this and quit. And then reopen it, because I don't know what just happened, but I'll tell you it wasn't anything that really was very useful for me. So we've got this set up where the sine wave is now pointing off towards... That's so weird. It like really screwed everything up. Fucking bizarre. Still, it's okay now. So we're going to have this green, and we're going to multiply by the sine and the float. And this float is the fin waggle amplitude. There we go. This is going to be fin ripples per meter, whereas this is going to be tail ripples per meter. And then here, we're just going to go ahead and call this anim speed 2, because those are going to go away. We're going to replace the anim speeds. So we're also going to need to use a note field. I thought that when you put a note field in, it would store... Yeah, see, look how they pop in front. I believe that if I move or duplicate the note field, it's going to move or duplicate those objects now. But for some reason, the first time I tried, it went bazonk. Just totally, totally berserk. Anyway, this is fin ripple green. What we're going to do is we're going to turn off the tail ripple by just bringing the tail ripple amplitude to 0. And then we should have a result that is just the fins, see? Now, the thing about this is that it's not really very realistic. That's not how they actually look. The amplitude is too high, and the animation speed, the ripples per meter is way, way too low. There we are. So something like this is really how they look, more or less. It looks like we might have to do some work here and there, but you can see how that is more in tune with how things happen. The anim speed needs to be substantially higher, though. So if we were to bring this fish down into the water where we can see it, and just take a look and see how that feels when it's actually being animated at a human speed instead of by whatever the updates are. It's also very, very large, so all of these are going to have to be refactored because we're going to be using a different size fish. That's fine. Not a big deal. All of these things can be tweaked until the cows come home, as long as the tweaking is allowed. You know, it has to exist as something that can be tweaked. So if we take a look, you can see that it's just got a little bit of fin motion. The amplitude is probably too low. Let's bring that amplitude up a little bit more. It's not perfect yet, but that's a lot better than waving the tail. We'll work on it a little bit more. But remember, this is for small fish. We're looking at it super close up. And obviously the number of verts involved is ridiculously low, so we're getting a very aggressive wibble wobble. If we were to bring out the number of verts another step, so let's close that. Did I just not save it? Well, too late now. If we bring it up from 1 subdivision to 2, that should allow us to get a much more fluid set of animations out of it. But what we'll be doing is modifying it lots. Even when it's smooth, it doesn't look quite right, does it? I think it's simply too slow. Ah, you know what it might be? It might be that I painted the entire fin. Yeah, that's what it is. So the problem here is my weight painting. If I go back over into this, you can see how I've used green as my weight, but I don't actually want the green to be full green, not at that particular location. So we'll just bring in the alpha picker, and we will choose a medium green, something like that. And that's going to be what we use for the front. There we go. That should feel a little bit better. That'll give it a little bit of stiffness, which will hopefully help us to alleviate that so it's not quite as aggressive. Now in reality what we would see would be the fish would be slowly coasting forward based on that animation. I just don't know. I don't know whether the animation feels wrong because I'm looking at it up close, or whether it feels wrong because I'm doing it wrong, or whether it feels wrong because I'm not moving the fish. Well, it's easy to change later, so whatever the case may be. If I were to bring the amplitude for the fin wiggle down to 0 and bring the tail amplitude up to, 1's a little high, how about 0.6? What we get now is, this is the animation we used to have, more or less. It's obviously quite slow. That's how it is. you can feel how it doesn't really feel like a fish waggle, not properly. And I think that's because the red channel is not properly weighted. I think I need to do a little bit more here. Mifaz wants the tail waggle to be much more pronounced. Presumably he means the tail waggle animation and not the fin waggle animation on the tail. It gets confusing very quickly, as you can see. So what we're going to do is we are going to reduce the brightness of these considerably. I really wish I could see the verts. Why can't I see the verts? There used to be a button. There is some kind of... Now, I know there is an X-ray mode. I just can't remember it. Let me take a look here. X-ray Blender 2.8. Do you mean X-ray Blender 2.8? Under the Overlay tab. X-ray. That's not the right thing. I don't actually mean X-ray. I mean... you know what I could do? I could just mark it as not flat. And then I could just take away this subdivision surface because we're not painting the subdivision surface. Yeah, so I actually agree, Mifaz. It really does depend on the fish. Some fish have really glorious tail waggles when they're just trying to move. And they're not flexing their bodies. They're just flexing the little thing on the end of their tail. And when they do that, it gets really aggressive. So I was thinking about using some different shades. We're gonna have to look into it. Anyway, if we bring this down, what we can do is use like a 0.2 for this. And then we can use like a 0.7 or a 0.8 for this. And now there was a button I hit that apparently grabbed. What was it? I don't know. There is just a quick little button you can press to sample from the object, but for some reason I can't seem to find it, so whatever. So now what we've got is we've got this yellow, this ridiculous yellow, and the yellow needs to be brought down. It's just, it's way too bright, which means it's getting way too much attention. So we're going to bring the yellow down into a kind of muted gray. And down here we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to need to, I'll just do the same thing straight up. So that's going to make that ripple up there a lot less intense, and we'll have the ripple back here be more intense by bringing up the full yellow. So now the tail wibble should be substantial. So let's take a look here. So right now we're looking at the tail motion, which is very gentle. It doesn't actually make much sense for this category of fish to have a pronounced tail waggle, since they're kind of soft and chubby. It doesn't feel too bad. There are definitely some issues. We got some vertex popping there at the top. You can see that. How it's folding over itself. That's just because I recycled something. In the final version we won't have that problem. So that is kind of a gentle swimming motion with our tail. If we bring our tail amplitude down to maybe 0.1 and our fin waggle amplitude up to maybe 0.5, we should be able to see something that, well, definitely too low of a polygon count here. All right, hold on. Let's bring back the subdivisions just so we can see it a little bit better. It's funny, I actually spent like an hour this week just looking at fish, and it did not stick in my brain well enough, apparently. Maybe the frequency is actually too high. Oh yeah, that's much better. The frequency was just way too high. So if we bring it up a little bit above that, maybe to 1, and then bring up the animation speed considerably. That's actually pretty close. At least it feels like that to me. Now, not having any tail waggle involved is a little bit of a silly feature. It doesn't feel quite right. So let's bring in just a little bit of tail here. And we're going to need to set the two animation speeds to identical, otherwise they won't be in sync. I don't buy a 100%, but I buy a 50%, and that's better than what I had before. So now the problem is, what do we do with the fin up front? And the issue with the fin up front is it is something that goes in basically any direction it wants. When swimming with the fins in front, they do this beating motion, which is unfortunately not really a sine wave and not really on a specific axis. It's more like a bird's wing. So it will come up and then tilt and pivot and then push back and then tilt and then come forward again, so that you get this kind of, swimming motion, how you might use your hands when you're swimming. But that's only if they're this kind of fish. Fish with different kinds of fins have different kinds of swimming motions. But the problem here is that we're looking at a sine wave where a negative value and a positive value on that sine curve have radically different vertex offsets. It's not just multiplied by a specific value. I guess the first thing we can do is duplicate one of these sets. So since that's x, I guess we'll go down. If I can grab all of these and duplicate. We'll set this up as fin motion. Maybe I should call it hand motion or something. And we'll bring that in as a y offset. And obviously that's blue. Now, it's going to be garbage at the moment, but let's take a quick little look at it. So, you see these floats? There it is, see it? That's actually not as shitty as I expected it to be. That isn't right, but it's way less not right than I thought it would be. Because obviously the fish actually pivot their fins, but the fact that it's using a sine wave almost gets it. It's real close. Maybe if I add in the z value. Oh, come on. Let me click. And save that. Save. Why is it misbehaving all of a sudden? My computer might be about to crash. If I leave all of a sudden, I apologize. All right, so that's obviously wrong. Let's go ahead and expand this notes section so that I can fit some more stuff into it. And then we will put in a multiply. And we'll take this multiply, pipe it into this multiply, pipe that out to z, and have it multiply by 0.25. And then we can save that, maybe. Oh, that's not too shabby. Obviously, at this point, it feels more like bird wings than a fin. Very few fish have fins quite this large. I made them this large for testing purposes. And I think what I need to do is actually add in some x. But the problem is what I want to do is multiply the x by a factor because I want to push it away from the center of the body. What we're coming up with here is x offsets rather than the actual x value. But we do have the actual x value. It's over here. So we can take this x value and we can actually just expand this comment box like a ton. There we are. Go. Bug. I found you a bug. All right, so this x value that we've got for the vertex position, what we can do is we can invert it and add in a small amount. So we'll go ahead and do that. So we'll just multiply that, and then we'll add that in to our x factor. So u and u. And our factor will be, say, negative 0.5. But this isn't being modified by our sine wave at all. So we have to actually pull in our sine wave as well. So we multiply and then we add the sine wave. Add the sine wave? Don't we multiply and then multiply in the sine wave? Isn't it just like a stack of endless multiplies? I think it is. I think it is just a stack of endless multiplies. So here you can see that the fish is pulling its fins in and out. I think that I might have got the negative backwards. Because what I actually wanted to do is when it pushes back, it moves its fin towards its body. And I really want that to be the case, but I've got it backwards so that when it pulls up, it puts it in towards the body. So that's not a big deal. I can just invert that multiply. Oh, that feels a lot more organic. It still feels strange. It doesn't feel fish-like. It feels more like maybe a squid or a cuttlefish, but it's getting more in tune with what we actually want it to be in the long run. I think maybe we also need to have trying to think about what would make this look better, and I think what would make it look better is having an actual fin shape rather than a random flap of mesh elements. I haven't looked at the dashboard in quite a while. Yeah, it's fine. So because it doesn't actually look like a fin, the actual motion is kind of weird. That's how a fish would have a hard time using it in the first place, I suppose. But that is a swimming motion. That is a motion I can buy as the fish pushing itself. The fin it has is a little bit iffy, but the way it's using the fin is pretty accurate. You might notice there are some striations on the fish. That's because we are still using flat shading. I can fix that. Just it's strange how it looks a little bit different in scene view. Not quite sure why that is. From the side, it doesn't look very good, though. From the side, it looks kind of crap. I think I need the fin to be slightly down. Let's go ahead and just, instead of having this fin going straight out, let's modify it so that it's a little bit less stupid looking. I actually don't have it memorized how a fin looks. I was planning to do research on that later. But we'll start it at like a 30-degree angle, and then I think what I can do is to make it look a little bit better, I can pull this out. No, that doesn't seem right, does it? Is that the opposite? No. I've gotten too used to drawing spaceships is the problem. Let's go ahead and just see how that looks. So the X stretch is a little bit severe, whereas the Z stretch doesn't appear to be severe enough. Yeah, so going up and down across the fish, the vertical motion is way too big. The long motion is way too small. So let's go ahead and modify these values. So all we need to do is create one more multiply. So we'll just have it so that all of these can be multiplied by their own factors. And we can make those factors things we can set, or we could, do them independently, however we want. In this case, we're going to multiply this by 0.5. This is being multiplied by about the right amount. This one, where you add it to the X, I think we need this one to be like maybe 0.5. There's actually several motions going on here, and it's not just by axis. There's 2 motions on one axis and 1 motion per each other axis, and that's making it a little bit hard for me to remember what's going on here. So what I've done is I've reduced the vertical motion considerably, the up-down. I added in a little bit more motion towards the back of the fish, like so, and that has made it a little bit more viable. Obviously, there's a lot of stretching going on, and it doesn't really look good, but that's because it doesn't look like a fin. It looks like something random. But if I saw this as a tiny fish moving along at a slow rate, I would buy it. The only issue I have at this point is, well, aside from it not looking like a fin, because I didn't bother to do any research, the problem I've got with it now is that fish will frequently use one side or the other. I guess I'm going to assume that if they're small fish, the player won't actually notice, but most fish do not flap both sides. What they actually do is they'll use one of those hand-like fins up front really aggressively to turn. They usually use their tail to turn as well. They'll actually tilt their tail, but if they're just making a small correction, they will just flap one fin. Still, now that we've got this running, we have to remember that this is not actually how it's going to be used. What we're going to do when we pass in values is we're going to be passing in a set of values for how aggressively the fins should be flapping, how aggressively the fins should be wiggling, and the direction the tail should be tilting. This is important because the direction the tail should be tilting is something we might be using for turning and not for actually propelling. I'm just not sure. It's going to be a lot of things to pass, and my voice is going, so I think I'm going to actually stop now. But I did enjoy today. I hope you enjoyed it. We worked on some fish and some plants, and we had a lot of fun. It was a blast, as I'm sure everyone will agree. Feel free to ask any questions, but I think that's going to be it. I'll pay attention to the chat for a couple more minutes if you have final notes.